Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time off to be here today. I'm Karan Mulchandani, the founder of a passion-based social enterprise called Enlightened Sapiens, and I will be your host for today. So on behalf of the South Asia Bonsai Federation, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you here today. As you know, SABF comprises of 5 countries: Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and India. Today, we have all across India and all SABF countries as our audience. We welcome them all. We have designed a very special program for all of you here today. We have the highly respected and world-renowned Master from USA, who will be sharing his immense wealth of on Suiseki with us live. I hope you're excited as we all are. If you have any questions during the program, do put it in the and at the end of his presentation, Master Tom Elias will interact with you and help answer your queries. And now, I'd like to invite the President of SABF, Mrs. Sneha Prasad, to say a few words. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, South Asia region. This is the first early morning session that we are conducting so that we are looking into if it suits everybody, it will give everybody full day free too. Today, South Asia Bonsai Federation presents Mr. Tom Elias, a noted Suiseki veteran, hunter, stone hunter, artist, collector, and author of many Suiseki books on this art. This is our third iconic presentation on Suiseki art. Mr. Lindsay Bibb, Chairman WBFF, launched the series. Anthony Gadan from Philippines had been our second guest, and now Tom Sir is our prestigious speaker for this day. I want to announce, as is my habit again, as a governing council of Digital Bonsai School, that we are going to start a special session on the art of Suiseki, and it will be held by all the visiting faculties from abroad because they are much superior, well-versed in this art than we are, and we need to catch up. This is one very important announcement. There will be extra sessions besides what we have already planned in the school. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Tom, and Sudhir is sitting with a big resume of his, and I will hand over the screen to him. Karan, over to Sudhir.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you this morning. Greetings.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, Karan. Greetings from South Asia Bonsai Federation. I'm Sudhir Jadhav, Secretary of South Asia Bonsai Federation. I'm greatly honored to introduce Master Tom Elias today. Master Tom is a bonsai historian and a recognized international specialist of viewing stone and Suiseki. He and his wife, Madam Hiromi Nakaoji, have been collecting and researching the ancient art form for over 25 years throughout Asia. They have made over 50 trips each to China and Japan to meet with stone connoisseurs, attend exhibitions, and present lectures on stones. They have assembled an extensive library of books, serial publications, and catalogs, mainly in Japanese and Chinese, relating to stone appreciation. Master Tom served as president of Bonsai Club International for 3 years. Master Tom was director of the US National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. for 16 years before he retired from that position 11 years ago. Master Tom established the Viewing Stone Association of North America, VISANA, in 2012 as an online educational forum to provide accurate information about viewing stones. The website www.visana.org has grown to be one of the largest and most comprehensive sources of information available on the internet. Master Tom is the primary content provider for this website. Master Tom Elias had authored, co-authored, or edited 6 books on viewing stone and Suiseki. Chrysanthemum stones, The Story of Stone Flowers, 2010, Viewing Stone of North America, 2014, Spirit Stones, The Ancient Art of Scholars Rock, 2014, Viewing Stone of Yunnan, 2018, Contemporary Viewing Stone Display, 2020, and Small Stones World Apart, 2021. He has written numerous articles on viewing stone, Suiseki, and bonsai for Rock and Gem magazine, Golden Statements, and Bonsai and Stone Appreciation magazine between 1999 and 2018. He has received following awards related to stone appreciation. 2001, the International Writers Award from Bonsai Clubs International. In 2010, the Emperor of Japan conferred the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold Rays with Master Thomas Elias. This is the highest award the Japanese government bestowed upon a citizen of another country. The award was presented for his promotion of Japanese art and culture. In 2013, he was named as the Honorary Vice Chairman of the Viewing Stone Association of China. In 2014, he received an award from the Nippon Suiseki Association in appreciation for helping to spread the culture of Suiseki. Now, I request Master Tom Elias to please begin with his presentation and lecture. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be invited to speak to you today about one of the matters that mean a great deal to me, viewing stone appreciation. And this morning, I'm going to focus on one aspect of viewing stone appreciation, and that is on Japanese Suiseki. This program is brought to you by the Viewing Stone Association of North America. The Japanese tradition of stone appreciation has influenced people in many countries outside of Japan and throughout the world, in Europe, Africa, South Africa, the Americas. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
okay,
sir.
good. Okay, good. And so the practice of Suiseki, or Japanese stone appreciation, has spread throughout the world, and it has influenced people in every continent. So today I'm going to focus just on Japanese stone practices and not try to address those in China or Korea or other countries. That's another whole subject matter for a future meeting. Now, first, it's important to realize that the stone appreciation is an ancient Asian practice. Evidence points to its origins in China over 1,000 years ago, perhaps as much as even 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, depending upon how you define stone appreciation. As it spread, the customs were modified to the aesthetic beliefs and practices in other countries. I refer to this as cultural adaptation, when one country borrows a practice from another. And then centuries later, it spread to the Americas and Africa, other Asian Pacific countries. Now, there are 3 major Asian approaches to stone appreciation. The Chinese stones are closely associated with the arts and literature. They came to Western countries primarily through the importation of art, literature, and antiques. And in China, there are many names for stones that are used there. Some of the earliest ones are Wenxi or Meishi. Wenxi means textured stone. Meishi means beautiful stones. And then later, other names came into use, such as Gongxi from the Song dynasty, which was reserved for special stones, superior stones that were suitable to present as a tribute to a high-ranking monk or official. Then we have the Japanese stone, Suiseki. This came to Western countries primarily along with the introduction of bonsai, or a few years after bonsai. And thus it's had reached a much larger audience. And then we have the Korean practice of Suiseki, which is not terribly well known outside of Korea and mainly practiced by Korean members in other countries. So today I will look at the definition, the early days, and work through all the way to the enhancements and joy of Suiseki. And I'll be very happy to try to answer questions at the end. The word Suiseki is derived from two other words, sui, which comes from suibon or water tray, and it's combined with seki, which is one of the two Japanese words or terms that it's translated in stone. So Suiseki it means water tray stone. You also may see the term suibon seki, which is basically the same. Now, the current definition of Suiseki as defined by the Nippon Suiseki Association it's a general term referring to a stone that captures the poetic beauty of a natural landscape scenery. In a single stone, one can sense the whole of the universe, making Suiseki the most spiritual and culturally rich pursuits celebrating the art of nature. Now, if you look back in the modern history, in the 1960s through the 1980s, the definition was similar to this, but the practice was different. They appreciated a much wider range of stones. And so there has been a gradual change and refinement within Japan of what is Suiseki. And not all people practicing Suiseki will agree on the term. There's not a consensus. And in exhibits today, you will see both work stones and natural stones. I like to use a definition. The definition I prefer is a natural appearing stone that evokes feelings and has the power to suggest something in nature far greater than the stone itself. If you look at this Faria stone from Wakayama, you can see what appears to be a mountain range, four or five peaks, and then the white quartz on it. But when you look at this, if you get the impression in your mind that these could be clouds or mist on the sides of the mountains, then you're beginning to understand the definition of Suiseki and how it invokes feelings. So that the former owner of this stone gave this the poetic name, white clouds coming and going. Now, when you look at this stone, this black basaltic stone from North Island of Hokkaido in northern Japan, do you just see a stone sitting in a wood base? Or does it remind you of something? Does something come into your mind? And if it does, then it's a true Suiseki. Now, the terms used to define the aesthetic qualities are mainly subjective and not easy to quantify. Here in North America, we like to have things sharply defined. But in Japan, they don't define things sharply. They're vague on intention. And so with overlapping meanings. Now, it's known among the experts in Japan that the cultural stone appreciation was introduced from Japan and then adapted and evolved in Japan and became known as Suiseki. The writers in the better books in Japan readily acknowledge this. This is another Faria stone, a very attractive Suiseki. In the Japanese history of stone appreciation, writers often attribute the first records to the Kamakura stone, about Kamakura period, about 800 or 900 years ago. And it appears to have arrived in Japan with Buddhist monks as Buddhism spread from Japan to Korea and to Japan. And the monks had a reverence for nature, and they preferred stones resembling mountains. They often carried a small stone in their robe to use as teaching lessons. Then in the Edo period, about a 270-year period, Bonseki and Kiseki was embraced by Japanese literature. Bonseki is appreciating stones on a tray or a black enamel board, and Kiseki means fantastic stones, largely referring to Chinese stones. Chinese stones were brought to Japan and used and appreciated. And then near the latter part of the Edo period, one of the best known collectors, Rai Sanyo, amassed a very large collection and helped further the knowledge and of Suiseki in Japan. In the late Edo period, early Meiji, stones were often used to decorate the waiting rooms in the formal tea ceremony practices. When you went to participate in a formal tea ceremony, you were ushered into a waiting room. And in that waiting room, there were several art objects for people to appreciate and also to develop the proper frame of mind before you went into the next room to participate in the actual tea ceremony. This illustration is from the Sencha ceremony, the tea leaf ceremony, published in the Edo period, in the Meiji period, and shows a Chinese lingbi stone in this room. So the Japanese did use and display and appreciate Chinese stones first, and then began to shift over to their own native stones in exhibits and in waiting rooms such as this. Now, in the early period in Japan, stones were often displayed in metal trays. This is some of the earliest stones were displayed like this, just resting in a tray. Sometimes you would see this displayed in a tray like this with water. And it was only later, in about 120 to 130 years ago in the Meiji, that they began to use sand. The use of sand cannot be pinpointed to a particular year, but gradually the water in trays were replaced by the use of sand. And then the use of sand was adapted by the Chinese much, much later. So we have to credit the Japanese with incorporating sand in place of water. Now, in the modern history of Suiseki in Japan, after the Second World War, it took a number of years for the economy to recover, and then it boomed. And in the 1960s, people, this was the beginning of a period of the popularization of Suiseki in Japan. Prior to the war, a limited number of educated people, scholars, artists practiced Suiseki. But by the 1960s, it became popular. It became a popular hobby. And people were encouraged to go out to the rivers and searching for stones and displaying them. And the price of stones rose sharply during the bubble economy as the economy expanded greatly. After the bubble economy burst and they went into an economic decline, people were, not as many people were practicing Suiseki. Also in this period of 1960 to 1980, there were dozens of books published, close to 100 books published about the art of Suiseki, how to collect stones, how to display them, where to go. And so it was estimated that there may have been over 1 million people in Japan collecting and displaying Suiseki. Then after the Tohoku earthquake in 2011, that the Fukushima nuclear plant was destroyed, the practice went into a decline. People were holding their money, not investing it in stones. And throughout the Meiji and first half of the 20th century, Suiseki was almost inseparable from bonsai. If you wanted to learn about Suiseki, you looked at the monthly bonsai magazine. There were articles in it. And most of the bonsai dealers also had stones that were available for people. So bonsai and stones were very closely associated for a long time in Japan. And even now at the Taikan-ten in Kyoto, or the Grand View exhibition, you can see stones and trees displayed together. Now, the Nippon Suiseki Association was established in 1961, much later than the Bonsai Association. They first held their annual exhibits in a department store for a few years. Then they switched to the Meiji Shrine in Tokyo, and they've held annual exhibits at the Meiji Shrine there for over 60 years, and they still holding them there. Then in 2014, they moved to the Metropolitan Art Museum in Ueno Park and had holding their major stone exhibit in conjunction with the Nippon Bonsai Association annual exhibition. This is one of the inside part of the exhibit at the Meiji Shrine. They have an outdoor exhibit area and an indoor exhibit area for this exhibit. Now, the Japanese have a fairly simple and good classification system. They put all the stones together under Kansho Seki, which is translated as viewing stones, which is a term I like to use because it encompasses a broader thing. That viewing stones divided into Suiseki, which is mainly landscape stones, and landscape is interpreted broadly to include boats, figures, man-made structures, and figure stones. Chinseki are rare stones, often used for Chinese stones, and then Biseki, which is just correctly translated as beautiful stones. They're colorful, and often are polished. Now we'll look at a few landscape stones. These are all mountain stones, basically mountain stones. The one on the left is a distant mountain stone with the two primary peaks in the back part of the stone. The stone on the right is called Summer Fuji, or Mount Fuji in the summertime without the snow cover. The lower left has a mountain range in the back with a flat plateau in the foreground. And then the stone in the lower right is a three-tiered stone. It has one layer here in front. Then there's a little valley between the second layer, and then another very narrow canyon between it, and then the third layer. So this is all different types of scenic landscape stones, just some of the variety that are used in Japan. Other types of landscape stones can be ones that are called plateau stones with a flat area, raised area, and step stones. Now, there is not a sharp difference between a step stone and a plateau stone. There's overlapping, and don't fall into the trap of trying to place each stone in a discrete category, because stones that are intermediate can be in either one. It's not the relevant point. What is really important is that you're looking at the features and the stone is speaking to you, conveying something to you, evoking feelings in you. The stone at the bottom has a distant mountain range in the back. And then the majority of the stone is a large flat plateau in the front. This is if you're approaching, traveling across the country, it's flat. And then in the far distance, you can see this mountain range beginning to emerge. Here in the United States, if you travel from the Midwest into Colorado, in the many miles away, you can see the Rocky Mountains beginning to form in the distance. This stone reminds me very much of that. Then there are figure stones, sometimes called structure stones. This can include a hut stone. These are small stones that resemble rural, small buildings in rural areas, thatched with a thatched straw roof. They can be resemble animals. This is a stone from Hokkaido, Kamimukotan stone. And if you look at this, it tells you that it's some type of animal, but it doesn't, not explicit enough to say if it's a turtle or a seal or what. And that's good because it just suggests an animal. It's not too explicit. And on the right is a figure stone. This can be a human figure, or it could be a religious figure. There are many ways you can interpret this stone when you look at it, but it too is classified as Suiseki. Pattern stones are present. The most commonly encountered and best known are the chrysanthemum flower stones, which you see here. This is a small stone about the size of a baseball. And this is a natural three-dimensional chrysanthemum flower stone called a Saba stone, because it does have the depth to it and formed in a gas bubble or a air pocket as the stone was cooling. Over to the right is a Shimonita chrysanthemum flower stone. It's also natural, and it is from a different area in Japan. It has very narrow bluish green rays. To the lower part, lower center, is what's called a plum flower stone. And the matrix of this stone is a black limestone. The plum flowers in here that you see are actually crinoid stems. It's a fossil. It's the fossil stems of this organism embedded in the limestone. And so sometimes you will see on the internet or in the Western literature, the Japanese never appreciated fossils. Never included fossils in Suiseki. Well, this is not really true. They did. It's just that fossils are not terribly abundant in Japan. It's not the right environment for the preservation of fossils. There are also 2 or 3 clubs in the Nagoya area that specialize just in petrified wood as Suiseki, collecting and display them, or Biseki, because they often are more colorful. So fossils are used in Japanese Suiseki, but rarely. They're not common. You also find in Suiseki the use of Chinese stones have been incorporated. Chinese wax stone to your left, and this Li Po looking at the waterfall. It's a very well-known stone in Japan. It comes with a scroll with a waterfall hanging on it. And this stone, actually both of these stones are included in a book, Historically Important Stones of Japan. So they still appreciate some of the Chinese stones that's been incorporated into their practices. Now let's look at Biseki, which is translated as beautiful stones. It originates from the Chinese Miseki, which also use the same characters as beautiful stones. The chrysanthemum flower stone is one of the best known. This is one that has been polished. Some of the matrix stone has been removed and then mechanically polished to set off these mineral formations that resemble flowers. And this is mainly calcite that's radiating out from a central nucleus. They're three-dimensional in nature. Also, jade is rarely used in Japan as a Suiseki, mainly because it's very rare. They had jade artifacts that date way back, but didn't find the source of it until the 1930s. And so there are a few pieces of Japanese jade that are used as biseki. Now, in the evaluation criteria, the shape and form is very important. That's the outline and the three-dimensional depth. And the stone should appear balanced. It never should appear that it's off balance and about to fall. It should appear to be very stable. And then the quality of the material, the harder stones are desirable. Soft stones that you can scratch with your fingernail are not suitable, nor are they extremely hard stones in the Mohs rating of 9 or 10. The Japanese prefer a darker colored stone, dark gray, deep bluish green, or even black. Warm brown tones are good, but they usually avoid the brighter reds and pinks and other colors that you see. They tend to take these stones and put them over into the biseki category. Then on the surface types, there are many different types. They can be smooth, completely smooth. They can be rough. They can be very rough, furrowed. It can be reticulate surface. And people from Western countries often think that the very smooth stones are the best. But actually in Japan, the stone connoisseurs typically prefer rough textured stones over the extremely smooth ones. And then age. This is one that's much more subjective. They like the stone to look old. Now, we all know stones are old, but we're not referring to age in terms of the age of the stone, but how long has it been in a collection, taken out of nature and be held in a collection and passed from one to another. Because a freshly collected stone is going to look new. And the Japanese connoisseurs will say, that's not a real Suiseki yet. It has to develop a patina, a surface layer that looks calm, tranquil, and makes the stone look antique. And they often do this using the practice of yoseki, or cultivating stones. And I'll get to yoseki later in the program. A stone that has all of these, meets all of these criteria is obviously going to be better than a stone that only has one or two of these features. This Faria stone is a very good example. It is a hard, relatively hard stone. The shape looks like a mountain landscape. It has good depth. The surface of it, it looks old. It's a bit shiny, so it doesn't have that antique or a stone that's been around in collections for hundreds of years. It's a little bit fresh looking, but it still is a high quality Suiseki in Japan. So you need to look at these features, and when you're searching for stones and you pick it up and you look at it, you try to think of these characteristics except for the age. Obviously, a freshly collected stone is not going to have that patina on it that makes it look old. Now, in Japan, traditionally, stones were displayed in tokonomas. Originally, every home had a tokonoma, which was simply an alcove in a receiving room where you entertain guests. And you displayed different types of art in it. It could be a painting, could be a piece of ceramic pottery or bronze, or a bonsai or a stone. And so they still are used today. Tokonomas are still used today, but in Japan today, in newer homes, new apartments lack tokonoma. And so they have to create alternatives to a tokonoma. There's a modern version of tokonoma, and then others simply display it in different ways. So, and in the West, there are very few homes that are constructed with tokonomas. Now, earlier I mentioned that stones are often displayed in trays. In Japan, they're known as suibon, or water holding trays. And suibons can either be made of porcelain, high-fired ceramics, but they're very rarely seen. The majority of them are earthenware or lower fired ceramics, as you see here in the upper right, and they can be either glazed or unglazed, and various colors that would complement the stone. Or they could be metal. The most common encountered metal is copper alloy or bronze, and there are many variations of bronze. You can also find copper trays, not quite as strong as the bronze trays. And even older in the Meiji, they had iron trays that were used for various purposes, but could be used even today as a stone holding one. And then you sometimes will see a suibon with this configuration or shape. And this shape, known as moko, resembles the flower of the gourd family, the cucurbitaceae. And the flowers are relatively small, but it's shaped like this. And you will also find bonsai pots with this shape if you're looking at them. So these are all trays that are used in the display of stones. And with the bronze tray and copper trays, you don't want trays that have been polished and shiny. You want them to have a patina on it that looks old, an antique looking appearance, which is much calmer than a bright, shiny tray. And here's a very good example of a nice stone in a bronze tray. These trays are also known as dobons, but dobons are just another name for the metal suibon. And you can, in this stone, resting in the suibon, if you look at the surface of it, it doesn't look shiny, and that's desirable. It looks older. It looks like it's developed a patina. This stone has been in collections for a long time, and this stone has actually 3 lakes in it that you could put water in, holds water. And notice how the color of the stone and the color of the tray complement each other. They don't contrast. You don't want a tray that's going to contrast and stand out. If your eye is drawn to the tray first, then it's not an appropriate tray. When you look at a display of a stone in a suibon or dobon or any item that will hold it, and the intent is for the tray to define the space that's of the exhibit and to complement the stone, to help draw your attention to the stone. That's very important in display of Japanese stones. In this one, we use a Shimonita chrysanthemum stone with its very narrow bluish green rays. And this is displayed in a deep tray. And you need a deeper tray in order to hold this stone upright. If you used a very shallow tray, it probably wouldn't be deep enough for it to hold the stone in this way. Now, with chrysanthemum stones, you can display natural chrysanthemum stones in trays like this. However, you should never display a polished chrysanthemum stone in a suiband. If you did that, the people in Japan would say, "Oh, he or she doesn't know that much about Suiseki." So, and likewise, you wouldn't take a figure stone of a Buddha or a person and display it in a suiband. The suibands are primarily for landscape type of stones. Now, what does the sand represent? And the answer is simple. It's space. It could represent either land or it could represent water. It depends upon what type of impression you're trying to create in your display. If you look at this particular tray, you notice how the colors complement each other. And also note that the sand, the Japanese prefer a tan, light or light brown colored sand, a neutral color that doesn't stand out. They don't like to use white sand or black sand or green sand, which you can find, or artificially colored sand. They like the neutral color that doesn't compete with the stone. So this could represent a rocky outcrop along a coastline, or it could represent a rocky outcrop in a desert, in an arid area, sticking up. But once you use small accessory items, you can create a totally different impression. Here, I added a small bronze sailing boat. This is called Timpai. And once you add this type of accessory, this turns it into a water-based scene, or the sailboat is sailing around this small island rocky outcrop. If I took the sailboat away and replaced it with 2 or 3 camels, tiny camels, it obviously would become a desert scene. So the use of accessory items like this is important in creating the message, but they should always be used in sparingly. You never use a lot of them or many of them, and you want to remember that the use of accessories like this is to create scale, to create the impression that this rock, which I could hold in one hand, looks much bigger with this sailing ship there. So it creates the illusion or the impression that this is a much bigger scene than just a small rock sitting in a tray. Now, another type of stone you may not recognize as Japanese is the Nakura melon stone. This is basically a rounded stone, ball-shaped stone, about the size of a tennis ball, with a reticulate surface pattern. Now, obviously, you might say, "Oh, that's not a mountain, that's not a landscape scene," but you do find rounded stone in the natural landscape, and this stone could represent the universe. It could represent the earth. And in viewing stone aesthetics and viewing stone philosophy, you often see, well, you're holding the earth in your hand, or the whole universe can be condensed in a stone. So it represents something much larger. I like this little stone. It's very simple and attractive to me. So I see a lot in this, maybe because I've studied a lot about the early history and philosophy in China and somewhat and also in Japan. Now we'll look at bases. I think this is something that you're keenly interested in, the role of the base. And the base, called daisa in Japanese, it refers to a carved wood platform that is used to hold and orient the stone, help convey the message. So the first thing it does, it raises the stone up off the table. It partially isolates the stone. Then it holds it in the right position. Orientation. Do you raise one end or the other? Do you raise the back up a little and the front down a little so you can see it? And in Suiseki, Japanese Suiseki, the base is always subordinate to the stone. It never stands out. If your stone goes to the base first, then it's probably not a very desirable base. Now, in China, you'll see just the opposite. You'll see a larger, more complex bases that are an integral part of the whole display. And it's one of the basic differences between the Japanese and the Chinese methods of stone appreciation. So the base shouldn't be brightly colored or really stand out. It should be subtle with subtle feet. And this is a Shimanto river stone from the island of Shikoku. It's about 22 centimeters wide. Very simple stone, but it's also can be viewed as somewhat elegant with the smooth lines, and it looks calm. It looks peaceful. And this is one of the things that is important in Japanese stones, because that you often use these stones to for contemplation, for reflection, to escape from the everyday realities and the problems of encounter in society. Now, we became very good friends with this fellow. This is Suzuki Koji. He passed away several years ago, but we spent a lot of time with him in his home. And one of the first things I do, I ask him, what kind of base do I make? How do I know what kind of base to make for a stone? And I took him many stones. He's made dozens of bases for me. And he said, let the stone speak to you. The stone will tell you what kind of base. And you look at the base of the stone and you can see where the feet should be, the size and nature of it. And so he was one of my great teachers in Japan in regards to bases. Now, another base maker that I truly admire, and this is Mr. Hirata in Nagoya, and he's now considered as the premier base maker. And he's been making bases for me for the last 3 or 4 years since Suzuki died. And the lower picture here is one of his work areas. He has a studio where he does the carving and staining. And I took him this stone and we spent quite a bit of time just looking at it on this turning table, just trying to determine what angle and orientation the stone should be in a base before it. And you can see he has this block here that is holding the stone in the right angle. And he's taken a piece of chalk and made a line across the base to indicate how the base should come up, how high it should come up on the stone. And here you can see that line that he's made in chalk. Then he uses rosewood and he carves it first with power tools for the rough work and then with hand tools for all the finished. And here is the finished base. Notice how the base fits the contour of the stone. For me, this is very important because the base combines with the stone to make one element. And I prefer bases that do this. You'll often see bases that are that don't blend in with the stone. And he uses rosewood, and after he gets the carving done, he will treat it using a paste lacquer and stain and hand rubbing it to get this beautiful finish to it. Now, this is another stone that Mr. Hirata made. This stone is from Hokkaido, from the mountains, called a Kutaro stone. And this type of stone can be interpreted as a gateway to heaven, if you know familiar with the Taoist beliefs. But he made this base for this stone. And again, so you see how the contours of the base fit the contours of the stone, and it comes up and just follows the stone around. This is a really high quality base, superior base. Now let's take a look at this base without the stone. Notice not only the outside, but the inside, how it's finished on the inside. This is really takes a skilled woodworker to make a base of this quality. Some people will make it simply a cup-shaped base and put the stone in. I'm not a fan of that because it's just a generic type of base and doesn't really blend with the stone. So to me, this is a truly superior base. Now we can look at some bases. If you have a figure stone, represents a person, Buddhastiva, or a Buddha, it's acceptable to have a pedestal type of base. This can be in like this, or you sometimes will see a base that resembles a lotus flower, especially with a Buddha figure resting in it. And these types of higher bases are suitable for Japanese Suiseki that are figure stones. Now, most of the scenic stones, landscape stones, will have a very subtle base, a very narrow base like this. This is one that Mr. Suzuki made, only he left this area here. It's a very low overhang, and he did that deliberately. And so this base is definitely subordinate to this and blends with it. Now you will see stones like this with the Faria stones, where you have a more elaborate base. And that doesn't quite fit an elaborate legs. And you can see here with the feet, this is not a simple recessed foot. This is the scroll type of leg is more elaborate, and even on the sides you have several layers. And you'll find this type of base with the Faria stones from Wakayama, this type of landscape stones. And it's believed that the design of the base on this was influenced by Chinese bases. That may be true. I first thought it was due to the complex nature of the stone, but later I could accept the fact that it was influenced, mainly because the early collector of these stones in the late 1890s was a fan of Chinese stones, and he published a book on these stones, which included a number of Chinese stones. So we know he was influenced by the Chinese bases. So you can see in the Chinese bases some variations. It's not just one simple solution for all stones. Again, you let the stone dictate the type of base for it, but you never in Japanese Suiseki let the base dominate the stone. So your eyes look at the base first, or daisa. Now we'll take a quick look at shoku, or display tables. This is a traditional Japanese style base. Japanese style display tables. And originally, long ago, stones were simply displayed on low tables or platforms, or even pieces of cloth. Display tables came later as the furniture developed legs. And they used tables that served other purposes for adapting to stone use. This is a large Setter River stone that's about, I would say about 70 centimeters wide. So that's a fairly large table. Now you will find a variety of types of tables that are used in Japan. Some with very simple legs with a horse hoof curve into it. Other tables like this with a bamboo motif Here, these tables are used to display stones during the summer months because bamboo is associated in the summer. So if you're having a display, a seasonal display, you in the summertime you can use this. You wouldn't use it in the wintertime. Also notice this is a post and rail, the post and rail type of construction. This particular display table evolved from the box tables. They were basically boxes, shallow box type construction. As I said, there are dozens and dozens of variations of the tables. And they can have some ornamentation on it like this. The simpler the stone, the simpler the table. And you can even have flat pieces of wood to display them on, or even slightly raised stands. But you choose the type of display table to fit the stone. You don't just take any stone and put it on any table. You have to match them so they complement each other. And again, you don't take a large ornate table and put a very simple stone on it. They're not compatible. So this compatibility and complementary nature takes practice and experimentation. Now you can say, well, do I have to use Japanese tables with stones I collect in India or in Malaysia? And the answer is no. You can adapt it to your own customs and culture. I'm sure you have display tables in your countries that may have been based primarily on maybe Chinese style or others, but you can use them. You don't have to use a Japanese ceramic tray or a Japanese table to display your stones in. You can slowly begin to adapt them to your own customs. And I should mention that 2 years ago, when I was in Tokyo for the Nippon Suiseki Association exhibition at the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Museum, I was looking at the tables, display tables of their major national exhibition. And I noticed a number of the tables were Chinese. And so I cornered Mr. Morimai, who stages the exhibition. And I said, Mr. Morimai, I think this is a Chinese Chinese table, and this is a Chinese table. He says, yes, it is. When they incorporate the Chinese display tables in, and there's been so much movement back and forth between China and Japan. China imported lacquerware furniture from Japan, and it's been back and forth so that now very few people can actually tell you, are these Japanese style tables? Are they Chinese? Or were they influenced because of the cultural adaptations and going back and forth? Well, care and preservation. The Japanese has really mastered care of prized stones, really the nice stones that are valuable. And they do this by constructing boxes made of paulownia wood, very lightweight wood, very durable. And they'll store the stone in that when it's not on display. This protects the stone from being chipped or broken. And you may think stones are hard and they won't break, but they do. Pieces chip off of them and it detracts from them. So they make these boxes and keep the stone in it. And then on the outer side, they'll put the name of the stone. They might put the poetic name of it. On the back side of the front panel, they sometimes will put provenance, who owned this, or a poem, but it's part of the record of this stone, of the history of the stone. And that's very important. And I would encourage you, if you have really exceptional stones, to keep a written record or electronic record of when you got it, who owned it, when it was displayed. if you build a provenance for each of your stone, they would be much more valuable in the future. So this particular stone has name as Saigyo, the famous Japanese monk, and it's here on the front of this. So if you read Japanese, you know that. I mentioned that today most of the boxes are made out of paulownia wood, but in earlier times they made out of cryptomeria, mulberry, other woods. You can use any type of wood for these stones. So let's move on. In some of the Western books written about Japanese Suiseki, they say that the Japanese stones are always natural, never enhanced or altered. Well, that's really not true. That's one of the mistakes that got into the literature. Many landscape stones have a single basal cut to make a flat bottom to make it stable. Some stones are cut and ground like the chrysanthemum stone. Others are cut and ground to improve the shape of them. Sometimes you remove pieces of it, waxing and oiling, or even totally manufacturing a stone. And we were asked a number of years ago to look into this. A couple of members of the board of directors of the Suiseki Association said, Tom, we would like for you to look into this and write about it. And we did. We spent time with professional stonemakers. But this is an example of, in this very popular book, Japanese Art of Stone Appreciation by Vincent Crivello and Yoshimura, said that Suiseki are small, naturally formed stones admired for their beauty. This was in 1984. A little bit later, 10 years later, Felix Rivera, in his book on Suiseki, wrote that they're shaped by natural forces. And if you've really been out collecting in the rivers or mountains and looking for stones that resemble some of the Japanese Suiseki in the books, you will never find them because they don't form this way in nature, all of them. And a significant number of the Japanese Suiseki are modified. Now, this practice began in China back 900 years ago when they were carving and adding holes and darkening. It's in the literature. It's in the Chinese literature. It's also in the Japanese literature. This is just one example by, in a way, how to appreciate and take care of your Suiseki. In the back of the book, there's a detailed account on polishing stones. There's a chart of 29 different stones and how to modify them. And they illustrate this. It was no secret in Japan that stones were enhanced by carving and polishing, adding oils, things like this. It's well illustrated. And we spent quite a bit of time with Mr. Sakurai, who's one of the premier stone carvers in Japan. He's been carving stones, so he's been carving Suiseki for over 40 years. And many of the stones that are in books were his project. And he showed us how to make a hut stone, how to make a landscape stone. And so we wrote about it. The Seta River tiger stripe stones, this is carved by him from a Seta River stone. He uses the natural stone and then modifies it to make it more attractive. Even the bottom's been worked to look natural. Then there's another set of stones that you often see like this, called Yojiro stones. Yojiro was a stone collector, and he collected certain types of stones where you had a dark stone fused to a lighter color stone. And he then sold them to stone collectors and stone carvers like Mr. Sakurai, who would then carve it. This is pieces from the 1930s by one of the leading stone carvers. This is 100% manufactured. It's a collector's item. These stones are collector's item today. And you will see them occasionally displayed in modern exhibitions. Such here in Osaka in 1988, a Yojiro stone was displayed. Every major exhibition I've been to in Japan in the last 20 years have had enhanced stones as part of the display. So they've been accepted into the Suiseki exhibitions. This is a Shikoku Island chrysanthemum flower stone, a very rare type. This was in an exhibit in Japan, in Tokyo in 2015. Then I mentioned Yoseki. The idea, you go out and collect a stone, you clean the debris off of it, then you put it outside for the wind and rain or snow, whatever you have, and let it expose it to nature. And some people even water it once a week with a hose. And the idea is that the surface of the stone will slowly oxidize and form a patina. But it depends upon the type of stone and the mineral makeup, if it will oxidize and form a patina or not. Stones with high silica content from the river, such as wax stones, won't do this. A Faria stone from Japan is relatively soft. It will turn almost whitish if you leave it outside. So the Yoseki is not for all stones, but for certain stones. And here are stones that have been left out for many years as they begin to develop this sheen or color. And what it's doing is it's an oxidation process, technical aspect of patina. Well, the joy of Suiseki, another aspect of Suiseki is enjoying it in different seasons. Now in Japan, they have summer and winter and spring and fall. And they take advantage of that by displaying using different types of scrolls to indicate seasons, different types of accessories to indicate that, or a stone from Sado Island with reddish colors they may display in the autumn, but not other times. Now, what do you do in South Asia? You have a rainy season and not, so you don't have winter months, but you can again adapt to different seasons or different festivals and look at how you can adapt the stones to fit into your customs and traditions. You don't have to rigorously follow the Japanese seasonal aspects of stone display. You can adapt the displays to your own climate and weather and holidays. So bonsai and stones are like two wheels on a bicycle. They complement each other, and you can use them together. You can display them together. In the Kokufu 10, the big exhibition in Tokyo, in the early days, they displayed stones with it, and then the leadership changed, and they said, let's get rid of the stones. Now the stones are beginning to come back. In the Taikon 10 exhibition in Kyoto, you'll see stones and bonsai displayed together. So I see, and many of the aesthetic qualities used for evaluating bonsai are also used for stones. Now, what is really important is it's not important that you know the name. Is this a plateau stone, or is it a mountain, or is it a whatever? But what is important is that you learn to look at the stones and look at the various features of the stone. This stone is a Pampira stone from Hokkaido, fairly large stone. And I like to think of it that I'm just a tiny, and I'm hiking up through this, behind this ledge, high up through here to eventually get to the top at the end of a day's hike. Or I can stop here and look at this waterfall. Or I can climb over here and there's a tunnel, a passageway. And so as you look at the stone, you can, and turn it, you can begin to appreciate it. When I get a new stone, I place it on a little tray with sand or a little bean bag with rice in it. And I just change the orientation of it. And I'll spend weeks or even months looking at the stone before I have a base for it or decide how to display it. I'm looking at the features of the stone, and that's very important. And then how the stone speaks to me. That's when I decide to keep the stone or not. to have a base made for it or to display it. It's the feelings that I get from looking at the stone. So in Japanese Suiseki, it's the aesthetic qualities. The subtle, understated beauty is very important in Japanese aesthetics. Refined elegance. Does it create a quiet, peaceful mood? These are all aspects of Japanese aesthetics in dealing with stones. So in looking at Japanese stones, it can be almost a spiritual encounter between people and nature. And it's an experience that we should pursue. And so I encourage you to enjoy Japanese stones and the way they're displayed. If you want to learn more about Japanese stones and other stones, visit our website. Oops, let me go back. Visit our website. We have a Stone of the Month, feature articles about them. Over 1,500 photographs of stones are on the website from various countries. We now have seminars, 45-minute seminars on different subjects, and videos on YouTube. So it's a great place to learn about stones. We also have published 6 books on stones over the last dozen years, starting with chrysanthemum stones, the story of stone flowers, then the viewing stones of North America, which people from over 60 collectors contributed to this. We did a book on the viewing stones of Yunnan province in southwestern China. One on contemporary viewing stone displays, spirit stones, which is a large format book on Chinese stones. And then the most recent one published a month ago on small stones. We sponsored a contest and we had 127 people from 24 countries participate in this. Now, our next seminar will be on small stones worlds apart. It'll be held on November the 6th. If you're interested in joining us or want to be on our mailing list, just send me an email and I'll be glad to send you the monthly notices and you can participate as you like. So now I'm going to stop and I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go to questions and hopefully the correct answer.
Thank you, Master Tom. Like honestly, a very beautifully explained presentation, and there's so much learning. Honestly, there's overwhelming appreciation in the chat box, Master Tom. Before we get to questions, I'd like to just a few of the appreciation that everyone has had here today for your for this learning today. There's in-depth knowledge has been simplified by Master Tom. Kudos to SABF team. Mr. Tom Elias in his element, world-class stone museum quality art collection at Art Connoisseur Delight. Very methodical explanation, awesome collections. Thanks for this program. We're lucky to be part of this wonderful session. Wonderful learning experience, very informative. And this session has sowed the seeds of Suiseki in our minds in India, at least for me. Thank you for organizing this session and lots more. Love for you to view all the positive comments on the chat box. And yes, we have some questions. So well explained. I don't think we have much. It was so beautifully done. But yes, there are some. And Sudhir, if you don't mind helping us with that, with any questions.
Yeah, thanks.
We're just scratching the surface. We could go into each of these areas in depth. So, but let's go on to the first question.
Yes, so the first question is from Suhandi. I don't know the gender. So his question is Suiseki according to Japanese style, and as to what you believe, what is the difference between the two? The original Japanese style and what you believe is viewing stones to be, what is the difference?
What do I believe? I'm sorry, I don't have good hearing, so.
There's a question. The question is like the original Japanese style, and as to what you believe Suiseki is, what is the difference between the two?
Oh. Well, it's hard to say. I think the Japanese stone appreciation practices today are very refined. It's been refined over several hundred years that fit in with the custom. And it's hard to separate stone appreciation from other aspects of art and the culture. And so I look at this as there are certain Japanese stones that I love and appreciate and display. I also like certain aspects of Chinese stone appreciation. And even today, I like contemporary displays that are adapted to modern lifestyles, because people living in apartments or a condo, you simply can't go in and put in a tokonoma and haul in large stones. So you have to adapt it to what's important to you. And as you learn more about study Chinese history or Japanese history and how the stones fit in with aspects of that, with the literature. And that's why I tell people is we want to be informed by the Chinese practices. We want to be informed by the Japanese practices, but let's slowly begin to adapt stone appreciation to our own countries. Here in California, I look at how I can use Western artifacts, Indian artifacts, or Native American Indians, and use those with stones from the desert areas or the Western areas, and combine that. To me, this is very important.
The next question is from the same viewer. Do we still hold the original Suiseki guidelines from Japan 100%?
Can you type that in a chat for me?
Yeah.
Let's see, let me just see that. Do I have it? Okay. Oh, repeat that one more time for me. I'm sorry.
Do we still hold the Japanese guidelines 100%? The original Japanese guidelines, do we still hold them 100%? Do we still follow that?
Do I follow that?
In general, does everybody follow that?
In daisa making, most people in Western countries, their daisas are basically similar to the Japanese, more similar to the Chinese, because they're actually easier to do. The complicated Chinese bases take a different set of skills. Now, we have discovered that certain stones found in the North America don't fit Japanese in any Japanese category or like Japanese stones. And so bases are made, a more modern base that's suitable for that type of stone, to set it aside to make it an art object is perfectly fine. Because we have deserts here. We have a lot of deserts and semi-arid areas in the Western United States. You don't find those in Japan. We have tons of fossils, fossil wood in the Southwestern United States. And we use that as Suiseki or viewing stones. And so we make bases suitable for those. So I think that understand and appreciate their bases and styles and how they communicate messages, but then begin to use your own woods to make bases. If you want to begin to incorporate, say, into Indian motifs, design motifs into the wood, that's, for me, that's fine. That's part of the cultural adaptation. So it fits more what you do. And as I said, you don't have to go to Japan and spend $2,000 on an antique metal tray when you have good metal workers and artists in India or in the other countries in Asia. And you simply begin to adapt it. You can certainly go to Japan and buy stones and buy all these objects. You need quite a bit of money to do that. But I like to experiment here at my home with local stones and new ways of displaying them to fit in with modern lifestyles. How do you appeal to younger people and reach them? It's not always through the traditional ways.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's another question from a viewer in India, Dev Rishi. Does the worked upon stones have a different name than the natural stones? If you manipulate a stone, is it called it by a different name?
Called by a different name?
Yes.
No, they still, if you manipulate a stone, they still call it by the original name. For example, if you have a Faria stone, which is a very common, when you collect the Faria stones in nature, they're almost whitish. And you have to use a mechanical brush or grinder to remove that rind off of it. And then they often are then treated with oil or wax, put out of doors or just left for a while before they appreciate them. So the people that do the carving typically sell the stones to dealers who then sell them on to other customers. But the history of that carving is lost as the stone passes from one dealer to another to the customers. So people don't keep track of that. It drops by the wayside. But I use the generic term enhanced stones for ones that have been modified. Enhanced stone versus natural, but almost every stone that's picked up in nature has to be cleaned to some extent. And if you have lichens growing on it, those lichens need to be removed so you can see the stone. But lichens also modify the surface. They help dissolve part of the surface.
Okay. And this is the last question. What kind of polish or color can be used on Baiseki?
What kind of polish?
Yeah, could be used on a Baiseki, or a polish, color or a polish can be used in a Baiseki.
Well, usually with the Japanese chrysanthemum flower stones, when they're cut, they use a grinder and they grind it very smooth because those stones are very hard and the minerals in it will take a nice shine. They don't need to be waxed or oiled. You often will see waxing and oils are added to stones to darken it, to make it darker. Because people think, oh, all my stones have to be dark. So the wax and oils will do that. And depending upon the porosity of the stones, for example, limestone sands are relatively soft stones and porous, and the oils will penetrate deep into it. A wax stone, like the yellow wax stone, is high in silica and hard. It won't penetrate that. It will just run off. So, but the people, I really discourage people from using a lot of wax and oil on stones. If you're going to use it, do it very sparingly, just a little bit. It's just like when you take a stone and rub it with your hand, you're actually applying oil to it from your hand. That's part of the process. So, and if you do that, set it aside and let it sit for a month or two before you display it. I know when I visited some shops in China, the day before I come, they'll take a mineral oil paintbrush and they'll paint the stones. And I need to take a rag in with me to clean my hands off when I'm touching the stone. That's terrible. That's no way to have a good stone. You try to develop the patina and over time and appreciate that. So if you're going to use an oil, use a natural oil or a natural wax, not mineral oil or something like that. And just do it very sparingly. Or as I said, you can rub it with a cloth or your hand too, and that'll help improve the appearance.
Thank you, sir. With that, we come to the end of this session. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the South Asia Bonsai Federation and all our viewers to thank Master Tom Elias. South Asia Bonsai Federation would like to take this opportunity to thank Master Tom Elias for a wonderful lecture and presentation on the subject of viewing stones, Suiseki. It was indeed a very enriching and informative session. We are certain that all our participants from India and abroad will greatly benefit with this knowledge sharing session today. SABF also acknowledges the support provided by Madam Hiromi Nakoji. Thank you for gracing this show with your presence and answering all the questions of our viewers in the background and encouraging all of us. This program would not have been successful without the participation of our overseas and national level viewers. We thank you all for your keen interest and time. Thanks to the President of SABF, Madam Sneh Parashar, for her continual support and guidance. Last but not least, we would like to thank Karan and the Enlightened Sapiens team for hosting this show for us. You all have a very good day and a great weekend. Goodbye till we meet again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Just a quick update on our upcoming events. We have up next, we have on November 30th, on November 10th, Master Ravindran Damodaran Bonsai Lecture and Demonstration at 3:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, as well as November 12th, the National Bonsai and Suiseki Virtual Exhibition at 5:30 p.m. And as we all know, the SABF details are mentioned on the screen. You can reach out to them, as well as our details are mentioned here. Details for joining these upcoming events will be shared on the WhatsApp group shortly. So thanks again for joining us in this beautiful morning, and appreciate everyone being here. Thank you and have a beautiful weekend.
Thanks, Karan.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.